Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this 11th workshop in our series on nonviolent journalism. First of all, how is everyone? Any comments or questions on anything we've seen so far? We've just seen Bereket's little video animation. Maisa, Bruna, did you manage to finish yours last week?
No, not yet for me.
Bruna,
I've been a bit preoccupied.
Bruna, you have your mic shut. You have to open it.
Yeah, I did finish it.
Great. And did it get uploaded?
No, because
Okay.
the article isn't published yet. That's why.
Oh, that's why. I remember now. Okay, good. Right. Today's workshop is on the topic of reporting on conflict and reconciliation, which is obviously a key topic for us in Presenter. It's one of our key themes, peace and disarmament. So a little bit like we did with the workshop on opinion pieces, I've prepared a little presentation for a 12-step approach, in this case, for how to write a feature article. And I'm going to run through that now. So let me just share my screen. Okay, whoever's got their microphone open and is bashing something, if you could mute yourself. Okay, so the 12 steps for writing a feature story. Let's see if I can advance this. So first of all, as part of the reading, I sent out a list to a page on Wikipedia of all the conflicts that exist in the world. Well, I mean, as complete as Wikipedia can ever be, with a list of all of the major conflicts and kind of the scale of the conflicts. So today's task is going to be to prepare a feature article on one of the conflicts that exist in the world. So the first step is going to be to choose a topic and summarize your article in a sentence. Again, a little bit like we saw with the op-ed workshop. You know, it can be that you start your whole article from a title, from a headline. It's a possibility, but anyway, let's just choose the conflict for the first step. The second point is the context. You know, what is prompting you to write this piece? Maybe it's a topic which is personal to you. You know, it's involving countries that you live in or you have connections to, and it's, you know, it's okay to let your audience know about the personal connection that you have to a story. You know, remember, we've seen before that objectivity is a myth, but besides from that, it is good to have a hook to the day's news agenda. So either it might be because something has happened in that conflict, which is kind of reached the mainstream news agenda, or it could be something like, you know, it's the anniversary of something terrible or something good that happened, and we would just like to use that as a reason to remind our audience of this topic, of this conflict. The third step will be to give an overview of this conflict. Describe the war from its superficial beginnings, and the important word here is superficial, because if we decide to report on, for instance, the Russia-Ukraine war, in this point, it means talking about going back to February, when the Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. But that's only the superficial beginning, and generally it's the only one that the mainstream media is concerned about. But conflict rarely starts from nothing. Any conflict you choose has a history that dates back prior to the time when people most recently started to kill one another. So we're interested in the historical context. You might take in this example of the Ukraine and Russian war, you know, you might refer to the fact that back in 2014 there was a coup d'etat in the Ukraine, which involved outside forces, including the CIA. You very rarely hear any mention of this in the news when we're talking about the Russian-Ukraine conflict. But in reality, Russians and Ukrainians have been killing each other for centuries. The conflict goes back a long time in the historical record. And we need to see this context, because it's only in that context that you can start to see the repeated cycles of war and peace and the associated cycle of violence and revenge. And where does the responsibility for this conflict lie? Remember, this is not just a superficial task of blaming the closest person to hand. You might say, okay, well, it's Putin's fault that, you know, the Russian army invaded Ukraine. Undoubtedly, that's the case. But what are the roots? Violence is something that people are always manipulated into doing. The next step is to humanize the victims on both sides. This can be done by asking questions of ordinary people who are caught up in the conflict, those people who are still in the place, and those who are displaced either internally within the country or externally in third countries. You could research into peace organizations working in the conflict area and find out their views on the conflict and the experiences of people who are affected. Another source can be refugee support groups in third countries. Organizations such as the Red Cross and aid agencies such as Save the Children can be useful sources. Then, of course, there are the victims in the aggressor country, the families of dead soldiers, families that are international, made up of, where people marry from both sides of the conflict. You know, these people are also the victims in any conflict like this. The next step, we need to think a little bit about what are the possible ways out from this situation. Ultimately, we know that in every war, in one moment in time, all of the warmongers will be forced to sit around the table and negotiate a settlement. So we can already ask ourselves, what would that settlement look like? We can also take advantage of peace activists who work in the area and they know the situation on the ground. How do they see the way out of the solution? At this point, we don't have to worry too much about the views of the warmongers. They take up all the space in the mainstream media. Nonviolent journalism doesn't have to be balanced and it doesn't have to be neutral. Furthermore, what are the views of the international community? What is the United Nations doing? Where is the process stuck? What alternative approaches could the international community try? It's not that the international community always has a peaceful outlook on the situation, but in any case, it's interesting to know what others are thinking. The concern for nonviolent journalism in such matters is the will of ordinary people who live in any given territory. We don't care about flags or borders. For us, the central value is human life. We care about the will of the people. And if a collective feels that they want to be autonomous, or if they want to align themselves with one country or another, that is for them to decide in a referendum organized and implemented without any manipulation or coercion or any threats of violence. International borders are not more important than human beings. And in this case, when people say, I know, but we have to keep to the borders from the end of the Soviet Union in this case. No, we don't. Maybe that's part of international law today, but I think, as we've said in other workshops, international law reflects the view of the people today, but that view will have been changing for a long time before suddenly someone says, okay, right, now is the point where we have to build that into international law. So, international law is something interesting. It's a point of reference, but it's not something which is set in stone forever. And it should be something which there is always a process to modify it. Thus, if a group of people decide that they want to be aligned to one country or another, or to be independent, that's absolutely for them to choose without without anyone else violently intervening to stop that from happening. So those are the main areas that we want to talk about in our feature story. And then once we've collected that information, we want to give our story a structure. Now, in a news report, generally less than a page of A4, not too much need to put very much structure as long as it follows a coherent order. But in the case of a feature story, you may well want to break it down into different sections using subheadings if necessary, and that's absolutely fine. It gives the readers an opportunity to pause before they can continue reading, especially if the article is very long. And writing a conclusion. Having collated all the elements that you have researched for your feature story, you have to consider what kind of conclusion do you want to give it. A conflict might appear to be intractable, but there will have to be a solution eventually. So now we're almost at the end. We've got the article, the article flows. What is going to be the hook? We're going to have a headline, yeah, but what is going to be the tidbits of information in your leading paragraph, which is going to capture the interest of the reader even further, so that they will continue to do it. So put 2 or 3 of the main topics, the main points, in your lead-in paragraph. Then comes the headline, which should, in this case, answer some of these questions: what, who, where, when, and how. And here we come back to a review of the language. Again, we've spoken before about the importance of language and how language has subtle meanings and hidden significance. And your audience will be aware when they read a particular word, they will be aware of a certain subtle meanings that accompany your choice of words. So we have to be very careful, with the words that we're using. My favorite example of this is when media organizations talk about regimes instead of talking about governments. Yes, we may consider that a government of one country or another is very violent, but it's their government, and somehow the people there have to deal with it. A country is not less violent because we don't call it a regime. No one talks about the Biden regime in the United States, but the United States government is one of the most violent in the world. And then our final step, in this case, finding an image or images. Again, because we're going to be dealing with an article which could be several pages long here, the use of images can be very useful for breaking up the text and also providing, something visual. So there we go. That's our proposed steps for how to write a featured article, in this case on the topic of conflict and reconciliation. So the task then for today is to start preparing a feature article on a conflict of your choice. Yeah, as I said in the introduction, from our point of view in Presenter, we want to give more space to this kind of journalism. It's very important not only that we report on conflict, but that we report on it with a non-violent approach. So, so this task today is going to be about each one of you finding a conflict which you would like to report on, and so in this task, I'm going to I'll send through this PowerPoint presentation so you can see all of the different steps that I have put there. And then I want you to start working on preparing your article, and then maybe about, let's say, 10 past the hour, I'm going to ask you all to present to us the topic, why you've chosen that topic, and then give us any information that you think is going to be relevant for your featured article. So are there any questions on the assignment for today?
I got a question about
Yes,
the
Bruno.
conflict. It should be like one of the conflicts in the Wikipedia page that you sent us, or like any other conflict?
What kind of conflict are you thinking about, Bruno?
I don't know. Like the only one that comes to mind is the Falklands War. The Falkland War. It's the only one, because I know a friend that her dissertation was about it. So she interviewed people and how the media told the story, like in Argentina. And I don't know. I know there's a journalist that frequently says that he lost his brother there. So I don't know. It's like the only conflict because of the country that comes to mind.
Yeah, great. Like I say, it'd be interesting to try and find a way of connecting it to the current news agenda, but the topic itself, very interesting. Obviously, it's a dormant conflict. There are not people killing each other over that conflict anymore, but the conflict hasn't disappeared. So by all means, if that's what you're interested in, I think it could be a very interesting topic to develop.
Yeah, like volcanoes, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
They erupt in some periods and they cool down in other periods.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to go around and ask each one of you to talk to us a little bit about the topic that you've chosen and what kind of research you're working on. So I'm going to start with you, Anita.
Okay, I'm gonna be super honest. I'm more confused than I was when I started, now that I've started. Because I wanted to talk about Yemen, since we hear about it a lot and then we don't really read it in the news every day. And because I've always heard about this, even at uni, like we talk about Yemen a lot, like I wanted to dig deeper into it, but then I couldn't really find like daily updates on Yemen either. So I'm trying to get as much information as I can from different websites, but then it's getting like I'm getting more confused, but I want to try and get to the bottom of this. So I'm gonna research more.
Excellent. All right. Good. Well, certainly a very, very important conflict, which people really aren't talking about enough. I've got, as you know, I'm working in an organization called the Middle East Treaty Organization. So if you want some help, then maybe I can ask one of my colleagues to give you a bit more background. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Very good.
And you have also on the web, on YouTube, you have more and more journalists who are doing interesting work on doing investigation and so on and so forth. So you might gonna find also interesting piece there.
Thank you. I'll look on YouTube as well.
Okay. Maisa, what have you chosen?
Okay, in my case, I was thinking about two things. The first one is the conflict between India and Pakistan, and the second one about the civil war in Afghanistan. So about India and Pakistan, I started doing some research about it, and I wanted to link it to nuclear wars, if war would erupt from both of them, and how it would erupt, for example, and how it would lead to several negative things, if I might say. So I wrote a few things about. I found a website that talks about the history of the conflict between Pakistan and India, and I also noticed the involvement of China in the conflict and how it is supporting Pakistan, for example, and how India is wary about that, and how maybe China would lead to that nuclear war if that we are worried about. And concerning Afghanistan, I was thinking about how the media probably stopped, if I might say, talking more about it after the Taliban raids in the country, and how girls and women are deprived of their rights, especially after the Taliban took over. Yeah, I wanted to link the Afghanistan situation to women's rights and girls' rights, and the Pakistan and India to nuclear wars.
Very good. Good topics, all of them. I thought you were going to pick the conflict between Algeria and Morocco.
Yeah, it was the first thing that popped in my mind at the beginning. But then I realized maybe it's not completely an armed conflict, it's simply political conflict for now. And maybe Tunisia is starting to become more involved in the conflict, and it started having bad relations with Morocco, unfortunately, as well. So yeah, I might talk about that too. It popped in my mind, but then I was like, maybe I should talk about something else. But I wasn't quite sure about what you thinking.
Yeah, excellent. All right, it's all good. Anyway, I guess that Tunisia doesn't have any conflicts with anybody.
Yeah, I think the only conflict it has is, I think it only has Israel as an enemy.
Okay. Okay, very good. Bruna.
Okay, well, basically, I've been like searching about the topic I talked earlier because I thought that if I started to look for a new one, I would do nothing in all this time because I've been confused. So yeah, basically, but yeah, I'll start searching about another topic. I did reread the list like a little bit about the ongoing armed conflicts, and the Taliban one, I don't know, I think it's pretty interesting, but I don't know much about it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, look, I mean, there's no urgency for these articles, but if you have the time and the interest, it would be very interesting to develop these through to publication. Bereket, what have you been looking into?
Thank you so much for your encouragement. So I'm just thinking to maybe research more and maybe write an article on the swift unification for lasting peace in the Korean Peninsula, and just to end the hostilities between the two governments. And because the question is my just opinion and observation is the young generation is really skeptical, on the issue of reunification. So why this brainwashed generation is like not that much interested even on the topics. They usually avoid, when you ask them, they say, oh, that's politics, So the overview maybe it could be, because it's obviously that every time there are so many news, about just building up, heavily military, including nuclear stuff. So the historical background is the country actually has divided, just one nation divided into two states, and for more than 70 years. So, and the families actually, one of the things is which is really we need to address is families who remain divided by the Korean War still alive and really aspire to see the nation unified. So the way out is like reunification. They have to work really hard, and they have to make it so soon, the reunification. And this is what I'm just thinking to write, conclusion for a lasting peace, that can be united the country. If there is a willingness for political compromise. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting actually.
Okay, well, I think you touched on a lot of interesting topics in there, Berika. I mean, I think it would be very interesting to get some opinions of what young people think about the prospects of reunification, for instance. You know, is it really something? You know, is it really something that people are very scared of, or I mean, in the younger generations, or is it something which is kind of, you know, an aspiration for the future? What are the points of view of the families that have been divided? You know, there's lots of interesting stuff in there. Yeah, it could be very interesting to see what you come up with on that.
Okay.
Great. So, are there any other questions? Anyone else got any comments? Pia, Antonio, David, anything to add? We can't hear you, Pia.
I would like just to point out that this methodology is useful not only for war conflicts, not only for bellicist conflicts or for nation conflicts at the national level, but also at a local level, and also other kind of conflicts. As a methodology is valid to write down about any kind of conflict. Yeah. So because we have gone, all of you have pointed towards wars, yeah, or national conflicts or international conflicts. But there are many other kind of conflicts, racism, for example, discrimination, but this methodology would also help to write down about.
Yeah. Very
Antonio,
good.
you're muted.
One of the principles of valid action that you have been reading and working with says that you will not make your conflicts disappear just when you want to resolve them. It's only when you can understand them in the roots, in depth, at a psychological level, as an individual level. But the same criteria can be moved into with different extensions into every type of conflict.
Yeah.
So it's quite, it gives lots of food for thought.
Yeah. Yeah, and go on, David.
No, I mean, at the last, I don't think we have so many people in the world who are writing right now on conflict with ideas of developing a non-violent point of view. So, and I think that's why also the new generation are tendencing to go to violent solution, because that's what they get every day. So we need to up our game on be able to show and propose and illustrate people who have other tendency and other vision. So that's, I think it's a very important theme for us.
It is, and the topic of reconciliation is key here.
Yeah.
And we really need to give space to anyone who is working on reconciliation, because otherwise, you know, these conflicts, they never die. If there's no reconciliation, there is no end to the conflict. There has to be a deep and profound reconciliation. I remember, you know, years ago, I used to travel to Africa a lot, and I was doing a lot of training on nonviolent, building networks of nonviolent activists. And one guy asked me one day, you know, but these people from this tribe, they massacre the people from our tribe. You know, what are we meant to do? Are we meant to just kind of live with that? And I said, well, look, you've got two choices. Either you can go in an act of revenge and go and kill their family members because they've killed people from your family members in a cycle which will go on forever and ever and ever and never end, or you can take the grown-up action of sitting down and negotiating some kind of settlement, understanding the conflict in its roots, and really dealing, you know, doing a process of reconciliation in order to be able to move on peacefully in the future. And it's those kind of messages which are completely missing from the discourse, and we really need to give more space to that kind of message if we can find them. So with those few words, we have 2 more workshops left. Next week we are going to look at the topic of what makes us human. How do we recognize that another person is a human being? Yeah, what's that feel like? So we're going to study that topic a little bit. And then the final workshop, which will be in 2 weeks' time, is actually going to be more of an evaluation. We're going to ask you to do a little review of the workshops that you've participated in, the work that you've done on this course, and we're going to ask for your feedback so that we can then, incorporate that, learn from that, and incorporate it in for the second iteration of this course, whenever we decide to do that. So, so looking very much forward to reading the output from today's workshop, and wish you all a great weekend and look forward to seeing you all Friday next week.